A. Irving Osser, initial A, then Irving, Irving, Osser, Osser.
What is the ethnic background of this last name? Do you?
My mother and father were both born in Russia, and they came to the United States as immigrants just after the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
They did not know each other in Russia, and they met here in the United States and married here.
Mm-hmm. Where were you born?
I was born in Ewen, Michigan, Ewen, Michigan,
What is your birthday?
August 25, 1933.
So tell me more about your parents. What did they do, and what is your education? What school you went through, and so on, and your siblings.
Okay. My mother and father met and immediately moved to Ewen, Michigan, which is in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We stayed in Ewen, Michigan for about 16 years. However, I was age 4 when the family left Ewen, Michigan, so I have no recollection of Ewen, Michigan.
Mm.
We left Ewen and came to Los Angeles, California
Mm-hmm.
in 1937.
I see.
Both my mother and father had brothers and sisters that lived in Los Angeles at the time, so it was a greater family in Los Angeles, and that's part of the reason why they moved. I attended all Los Angeles schools as I grew up. I graduated from Alexander Hamilton High School in West LA and attended
When was it?
1951.
Okay, so before you go further, I would like to ask this question. Did you know anything about Korea? Did you learn about Korean history from the school, or anything you knew about Korea at the time around when you were in high school?
I don't have a memory at all, except by the 11th grade, 1950, I knew that the Korean War had started, and in high school we had a vice principal who was a one-star general in the California Army Reserve,
Ah.
and he was activated, as were a number of my friends that were in high school at the time. I personally didn't belong to the reserve, and we lost a number of our people that were shipped over to Korea in 1950, and they are now symbolized with a gold star in the entry foyer of the high school. So really the first thing I knew about Korea was that it happened,
Through the war.
the war.
Uh-huh. Otherwise, you didn't know where it was.
There was no classes that I had, history or otherwise, that got me ready for Korea. And although I knew where Japan was because of the prior war, and China, I knew that Korea was in between.
You knew that.
I knew that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the best I could come up with. I knew that it extended from the Siberian Peninsula and was a place that I knew nothing about. I knew nothing what was going on there. I did happen to know that as time went on, that the older generation in Korea, some of them could speak Russian, and then later on some of them spoke Japanese because of the Japanese occupation. And then of course later on, not in my high school time, but later on, they spoke English. Some did. And that's it. That's my knowledge of Korea. I just knew nothing about it. The word Chosen, I had no idea what that meant.
Were there any Korean around your high school, in your neighborhood? Did you know any Korean people around that time?
No, not at all.
Okay. So what was your ambition for your life around the time that you graduated high school? What did you want to be?
I understand. By the 11th and 12th grade, I thought I would be following in my father's footsteps and becoming a retail businessman. My father owned 3 liquor stores,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a comfortable life, and I thought that I would follow in his footsteps. My father had other plans, and he said,
For you.
for me, he says, I don't want you to become a storekeeper. And so at a certain point, actually when I was in the service, he liquidated his assets and retired. At that point, I looked at my brother, who was a dentist and became an orthodontist, and I said I didn't want to do that. And while I was still in service, I didn't know what I was going to do.
Okay. So what happened after the high school? What did you do?
I went to college.
Okay. What college?
I went to Los Angeles City College.
Mm-hmm.
I went for 2 years, and at a certain point I received a draft notice to go in the Army.
What did you study, by the way, in LA?
Psychology and just basic liberal arts.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember when you received the draft notice?
I would say the beginning of 1953. I elected not to go in the Army, and went over to the Air Force and got checked out, and they said, finish your semester and go on to the Air Force and report then. And it turned out I had a reporting date for the Army prior to the close of the school semester, and so in checking with them, we decided it would be better if I went in. So I went in the Air Force in May of 1953.
So it was enlisting, right?
Correct.
Where did you get the basic?
I did basic training at Parks Air Force Base, which is just a little bit east of Berkeley, California. From there, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi, to Keesler Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed at Keesler and completed a course in communications. And I was all set up to go to Europe for my tour of duty, and whoever decided they'd rather that I went to Korea.
So what do you think about that? Looking back all those years, you were about to go to Europe. That's the destination that you were supposed to be. But you end up in Korea. You never heard about before.
Oh, I heard about it all
Heard
the time.
about it, but still, that wasn't your favorite choice, right?
Well, if you think about what I've said, I joined the Air Force not to go in the Army, knowing that if I went in the Army, I'd end up in Korea.
Right.
And I thought I would take the hedge and say, if I went in the Air Force, maybe I wouldn't go to Korea and I wouldn't get killed. So that was the set-off that I did. Well, the end result is I tried real hard in the school. I was top of the class, and the #1 person in the class got to pick their duty station.
You mean at the communication school?
Communication school, yeah. And just before graduation, the commanding general said, I can't do that because you're needed in Korea. I said, I'm sure they don't need me that bad. Well, it turns out, if you think about it, 1953, this is before computers. And a lot of the stuff we did was with slide rules to encode messages and decode messages. You had to use decoding sheets, and there's math involved. And I had sufficient amount of math that it was quite easy for me, and the classes I took in security and code work made it a natural for me, so I got shipped over there. One of the things that I did was make battle plans and put them in code, and then plans coming the other way would be decoded. You had different codes for each day, and it was some mathematics involved, but it wasn't that involved. I personally thought a junior high school kid could do it. First duty station was Kimpo.
When did you leave, departed from U.S.? Where and when? How?
Keesler Air Force Base to Travis Air Force Base, and then over by bus to the Oakland port and got a ship, and went by ship the first time I went. I think we touched base in
Japan, right?
Japan, and then we flew into Kimpo from Tachikawa.
So do you remember when you arrived in Gimpo?
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember at this moment.
Try.
Yeah.
It was before the end of the war, right?
It was.
So May, June or July? June.
And I remember summer '53. Best I can come up with.
And what did you see there in Gimpo when you arrived?
Well, Kimpo was a pretty fair-sized Air Force base at the time. The squadron that I was in ran the control tower. We ran the ground control approach, the GCA. That's the radar. Ground-to-air communications. And so most of the stuff that you think about in an airport, the military base is the same. And so my squadron ran that stuff.
What was your unit?
It's called the 1993 AACS, which stands for Aircraft Communications System.
(1993).
Yeah.
And that belongs to 5th Air Force or what?
5th Air Force.
What was your rank? What did you feel about Korea at the time that you arrived for the first time in your life?
I can recall going in and talking with the first sergeant, and from that particular base we serviced half a different operating locations for different things that occurred. And so the sergeant then had me talk with the executive officer, and we decided that I'd stay right there at the headquarters rather than go to a small location, and that they would probably loan me out to the commanding general to do battle plans. And that's what happened. So I stayed right at Kimpo. I was restricted to the base, I think for the first 5-10 days, something like that. There's activities going on, and they didn't have anybody leave the base. Then we finally left the base, and so right outside the base is a little village at the time, and there were Koreans dressed in Korean outfits as opposed to Western clothing. The rubber shoes and the stovepipe hat and things like that, and especially on Sunday when they went to church, so you could see that. It was quite interesting to me to see the costumes of the locale.
Was there a church?
There was a church there, yes.
Did you attend?
No, we had a chapel on the base, and about once a month they sent in a rabbi to have services, but typically we didn't have services. At that time, I can recall making my first trip to Seoul, and it was a two-lane road. It was a well-improved road. I mean, it was easy to drive because I was driving a Jeep. And the first place we come to was Yongdongpo. And Yongdongpo was not a village. It was a fair-sized town. But the major function of Yongdongpo at the time was the Army had a distribution center there, and also Korea had its train station in Yongdongpo,
Yes.
the commercial train station. It was quite big. And the end result was that we stayed there. Once in a while there were things that happened. We had, there were still hostilities going on. We had a problem every night. About somewhere between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock,
You're talking about Bed Check Charlie?
Vet Check Charlie would come in and throw hand grenades and shoot and do things. So the guys in the Air Force are really not set up to combat that. And Vet Check Charlie couldn't be fought with F-86s and
Right.
P-51s that were still left over. So we had a guy in my section said that we should do something about this Bed Check Charlie situation. So I said, why don't we go down to the Army Weapons Depot and get some little bit better stuff than our 45s. I was office personnel for the most part, so I didn't have to carry a rifle with me all the time. I carried a 45. Well, 45 isn't going to do so much shooting Bed Check Charlie. So the first sergeant says, why don't you go down and check it out and see what it takes? So I went down and I decided that rather than go to the Army, I would go to the Marines. And I figured that the Marines would have a better supply of stuff that I was looking for. So I took a couple of bottles of Johnny Walker Red Label. In those days, at the PX, Johnny Walker Red Label was about $1.25. No tax, no nothing, just cheap.
Yeah.
I took a few bottles. I went down and I found the Marines Weapons Center and went in, talked to the sergeant there. We were shooting the breeze back and forth, and I said, put it to you straight. I got a couple bottles of Johnny Walker Red here, and I need to have a weapon so I could shoot at Bed Check Charlie. And he says, what do you think you had in mind? I said, well, whatever it is, I hope it shoots 45 caliber bullets too, because we have an abundance of those, but the other kind of bullets you guys have, I don't have them. So he says, well, good, then you need what's called the Eagle. Well, you've seen them in a lot of movies, and it's really a heck of a gun. It's the one that the gangsters used and had that round canister.
Oh, yeah.
Except we never had the round canister, we just had a straight piece. So I got a half a dozen of them and a half a dozen extra barrels. So we brought them back, and the guys in my squadron, I gave them out. I kept one, except this time, around 10:30, we had trenches that ran near our tents, the place where we were sleeping. So we got in a line that was perpendicular to the flight path of Bed Check Charlie, and we had like 3 or 4 different trenches involved. So the whole idea was to get it kind of in a V formation shoot. Well, it took about 5-6 nights before we finally popped one. We got one guy.
Oh.
And we brought him down. he went a little bit too low,
Uh-huh.
and I think I have every reason to believe he was going to throw hand grenades. And so we shot him, and we got him down. And we didn't have Bed Check Charlie come and check on us anymore.
Oh,
But he went all, they had other airplanes, of course. They went all over the place and bothered all kinds of other people, but didn't bother our base while I was there.
so first Bad Check Charlie that you shoot down, and that was the last one for your unit.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah, that was really fun. We burnt out 4 or 5 barrels because we weren't used to shooting that gun, and it's not supposed to be shot at full automatic all the time. But we were on a mission.
Was pilot dead?
Sorry?
Was pilot dead? The Bad Check Charlie, the North Koreans.
Yeah, he died.
Mm.
Yeah, he crashed and burned. And that's our big thing.
Wow, it's a big thing.
The only other thing that happened that was really of great significance to me, because we're not going to talk about the classified stuff, but the general had me go once to a location, and he says, take a few guys with you, take a weapons carrier with you, it's like a pickup truck, enclosed, canvas enclosed.
Mm.
And we took supplies for 5 days. We're only supposed to be gone 1 day, but we took enough for 5 days. We're supposed to go to a hill, which
Around Gimpo, you mean?
yeah, near the base,
Yeah.
about 30, 45 minutes away
Mm-hmm.
to the north, and get up in the hill and look and see what we could see on the other side. He wanted a first-hand, eyes-on look. So we went up there, up top of the hill, we're there around sundown, and we're looking down at the valley. We had binoculars and checking everything, and I said, it looks like a bunch of ants. And I said, I know they're people, but it looks like ants. There were thousands of troops assembling, and they're getting ready to come south.
You mean North Koreans?
Yeah, North Koreans.
Was it Chinese or North Koreans?
Well, I don't know. They all looked alike. The uniforms, it was nighttime, I couldn't tell. Whatever it wasn't good.
Wow.
So I looked down, I radioed that back to the base, and I said, I think you guys are going to experience an attack, so watch out for airplanes coming first to soften you up, and then these troops are going to come running like a bunch of wild dogs. So, sure enough, here comes the airplanes, and they're bombing the base,
Your base?
my base. We lost the base a couple times before I even got there, supposedly. I wasn't there when it happened.
Uh-huh.
Anyhow, so we got back. I was talking to the control tower on a special frequency so that they couldn't follow what we were talking. And the guy says, don't come back to the base. Well, so we got on a little road and went in, hid the truck, a little camouflage, and waited until we saw what happened. And here's these hundreds and thousands of troops just running towards our base.
Huh.
And so because we gave them a couple hours advance notice, they were able to bring up airplanes and tell the Army and the Marines that they're in for trouble. And so they got advance notice. So it was a battle, and it went back and forth. We stayed hidden. So we're there overnight, and the next day I call up on to see if anybody's there. The base is still okay, and they resisted, and we got our own airplanes and bombed back the other way, and so they retreated back. But now they're all in this valley that we could see, and so they said it's better if you don't move so you're not detected. So we stayed for a couple days, and then we saw that they all evacuated and left that area, and we went back to our base, and all was well. And that was my military campaign.
You should be recognized as medal.
There's no medals. It was just what was going on. But it was really scary. That's the best way to put it to you.
Do you remember when was that?
I really don't. You know,
Is it after the ceasefire or before the ceasefire?
just before the ceasefire. Yeah. But I really can't, you know, you just put it out of your mind. That's how I deal with it. Just
I think we can find some record about that kind of battle and encounter with those North Koreans around. It's a 45-minute north of Gimpo.
yeah.
Huh. And it was before the ceasefire, right? Yeah. What were you thinking when you saw all those enemies?
I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what I was thinking.
But you were at the right time at the right place to notify the Gimpo base.
You know, what was I thinking? I was thinking about me, you know, because at a certain point I was going to get cut off,
Right.
and that was a huge problem, and I'm responsible for the 5 guys with me. So it was a big problem.
I mean, originally, just you were allowed to go out just to patrol, or what was
No, it
the
wasn't
origin?
patrol. It
Just
was
pick-
surveillance.
Surveillance.
Yeah.
Any other memories that you have about your service in Korea?
The
Kind
only
of-
other thing was a benefit. We knew that we were leaving. It wouldn't be too long, you know, within a year. I just had 1 year in Korea, but there'd be others, and they were leaving. We had tent boys.
What?
Korean
Tent
boys.
boy, bus boy.
Yeah, they were 13, 14, 15-year-old kids that were orphans.
Uh-huh.
And we used them for cleaning
Yeah.
and, you know, shining shoes and keeping the tent clean and stuff like that. So my squadron had, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 of them. And there were other squadrons, Taegu and this and that. So we got together and they figured that we should do something for these boys, because when we leave, what's going to happen to them? We got together with the wife of President Syngman Rhee, Madam Rhee,
Francesca.
and she was dean of the women's college in Seoul. So, short story, we were able to buy a piece of property that previously belonged to the Catholic Church, and it's where they trained novitiate nuns. And they converted that into an orphanage home for these boys. So we checked with our guys in Japan and the other parts of Korea and got donations so we could endow this situation. And I think we started with about 50 boys at the orphanage. And we had it set up so that they would finish high school, and Madam Rhee had it set up so that they could go to college, and we could pay for that at a modest rate. And so when we first opened up, a number of us went there to do some things, electricity, carpentry, painting, this and that, and get it set up. And I can't tell you what happened at the end because I wasn't there, but I was there at the beginning, and it was nice to see that we were going to do something. I remember the Korean word that we were using, a derogatory word, is kuji, and it's a kid that's in the street and he has nothing, and so he's begging.
Oh, 거지.
Okay, well, it's close. Okay?
Okay, 거지. Beggar.
We didn't want our kids to be kojis.
Did you name the orphanage?
I think I was there in the very beginning, yeah.
I mean, did you name the
Oh.
orphanage?
If they did, I don't remember what the name
Okay.
of it is.
That's a very noble thing to do.
Well, we saw what was happening to some of the kids, and we thought maybe it would work out. And then the end result was that after they finished with the tent boys, that they could use it continue it, especially if we had funds to do it. I didn't know if there were any girls that ever got admitted to the system, but the whole thing was just originally just for boys.
Mm-hmm.
So we modeled it kind of after Boys Town and thought we could take these kids that didn't have anything. We couldn't find relatives for these kids, couldn't find anything. I mean,
Right.
they were real orphans.
Mm-hmm. How did you come connected with Francesca, the wife of President Lee? You remember?
I don't think it was me. I don't remember. Somebody did. In one of our relationship, we had one of our guys that died of hemorrhagic fever,
Mm.
and he was Catholic, and he was in my tent. And I thought, I went to the base chaplain and said, we should have a memorial service for the guy that died. And I said, he's Catholic, and so we should have a mass. In fact, I'm not that familiar with it, but shouldn't it be a high mass? And he says, he's not that much of a dignitary that it should be a high mass. I says, you know what? Yeah, he is. He's here. So what does it take to do a high mass? He says, it takes at least 2 priests. I said, can you get another priest? And he said, not easily. I said, well, what does it take? You can call Japan or call Taegu, or what can we do? And he said, I really don't know right now. I can't give you an answer. So I talked with a couple of the other fellows around, and they said, let's get a Korean Catholic priest. So we called the Korean Archdiocese in Seoul. And I told the person who could speak English what the problem was. Well, I got a hold of the bishop. And the bishop, sweetheart, my goodness, he said, 10 o'clock Sunday, I will be there. I will bring another priest with me. Tell your base chaplain doesn't have to worry about it. And I'll bring the nuns, and there'll be a choir. And so we went on and made arrangements. Broke up the matzah, and he used that as the wafers. And we celebrated his life.
Uh-huh. When did you leave Korea?
Early 1954, so my guess is around February. I got to leave early.
Mm-hmm. What was the most difficult thing for you to serve during the Korean War?
The most difficult thing was the cold.
But you're
I come
from
Los
Michigan.
Angeles. I've been in Los Angeles since I was 4 years old.
That's right.
I'm used to the weather we have here. And when you start talking about 0 degrees and 10 below 0 and 20 below 0, and then the cold wind comes in off the China Sea, it's very damp and humid, and the cold penetrates your body virtually. And then I saw guys that had frostbite, their nose, their ears, their fingertips, toes. It may seem kind of selfish, but that was the worst part of being in Korea,
Uh-huh.
was the cold. I could handle some of the people dying, I could handle some of the other stuff, but for me personally, it was a real problem because I hadn't toughened up to the cold yet. So the first winter, and the only winter I had there, it was extremely cold for me. I used to wear 3 sets of gloves. We would wear a set of silk gloves, then a cotton glove, and then a mitt over that. And I never got any frostbite. I always wore double socks. I had good protective shoes, layers, And I didn't
Mickey
stay
Mouse
up.
shoes?
Huh?
Mickey Mouse boot? Did you have Mickey Mouse boot?
Yeah, we had waterproof boots, and then with a carton of cigarettes down in Yongdong-po, I got a pair of really neat boots with a zipper on the side, and because that's a lot of stuff to lace up, so the zippers were super.
Yeah.
And cigarettes were the commodity of trade. I didn't smoke, but I got my allocation of cigarettes. You get 8 cartons a month. And I think at those days it was like 95 cents a carton. So there's a number of things I got. But I really didn't like the cold.
What was the most rewarding moment for you? Happiest moment or whatever?
Getting my orders to leave. We call it FIGMO.
What?
FIGMO.
Why?
FIGMO.
Why?
FIGMO is it's a term, the first letter, the F, you can understand what that stands for. I got my orders.
Oh.
So when somebody would ask you to do something, you'd say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm FIGMO. A little bit of humor.
Did you know what you were doing there in Korea?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, we had a relationship after the Second World War in South Korea. And I knew about it because I had a cousin who in 1947 and 1948 was in Korea setting up the communication system at Kimpo, of all places. And so I was familiar. So we were protecting the South Koreans from the North and the communists. The whole idea was the communist thing.
Very good.
MacArthur was there, and then he got pulled out.
How was life? I mean, what did you eat? Where you sleep? How was your life outside of the base? Any exchanges, encounter or experience with Korean people?
I did. We had ROK Army personnel and ROK Air Force personnel working with us. And they, in terms, quite often would invite us to come to the home, meet the family, things of that sort. Every once in a while we'd go over and help one of the guys who had a damaged home. And it's very, very amazing how many of the military would go into the civilian areas and help them try to rebuild their homes. We would take things from the base, not material necessarily, just tools. And something as simple as a saw, a hammer, things of that sort. And then, of course, we had guys that, in my squadron, that were very, very much aware of electronics and what have you, so we could simplify and wire up a house easily. So we did come in contact with people. As a young man, I was single. There were girls that were in Yongdong-po. Not so much in Seoul. I didn't do too much in Seoul. Seoul at the time, walking around Seoul, it was depressing. It was depressing because I looked at the House of Government, and it was just destroyed. All the windows were out, it was bombed, it was fired, all kinds of stuff. It was just destroyed. And then the paradox was you saw little kids in their uniforms with the little hats on, and they were going to school. In the midst of all this destruction, in the midst of everything, and they had these little backpacks on. Backpacks were not prevalent in the United States at that time. We were still doing briefcases and dragging stuff. But the Korean kids were wearing backpacks with their school supplies. In Korea, I don't remember seeing the artificial food in front of restaurants, which is very common in Asia currently. But And it may have been in the past there, but I never saw it before. And I went to this one place as I was passing by, and it was a place where I knew I could park my Jeep, and there was a military policeman on duty, and so I could make sure that I had a Jeep when I came back. And they had the artificial food, it was a pizza, an Italian pizza. I said, oh my God. A couple of guys with me, I said, let's go in and we gotta try this. This ought to be great. So we went in and they brought the pizza pie to us right on the table, and it looked like the real thing. And they cut it up into the wedges, and it was horrible. It looked right. It looked just like the picture, but the contents weren't there. They didn't know what they were doing. There were things that were available, and these guys didn't know how to ask for it.
Right.
They had everything we wanted in Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and here we were 30, 40 minutes by airplane away, and we could have it immediately. So we did, and we had, we made a good time out of a bad time. There were simple things like I had the Los Angeles Times subscribed, and they would send me the Times. Sometimes I get 5 or 6 newspapers at a time because it bundled up, but I got the Times 7 days a week to keep up with what's happening in LA. And then I put the papers, when I was done with it, put it in our day room so other guys could share it. We got a lot of mail. In those days, no computers, no internet, no Skype. It was flimsy paper. And I'm a amateur radio operator, a ham.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go into our radio room, change the frequencies, change the antenna settings, and shoot across and talk to people in the United States, talk to people in Los Angeles. Then we have what's called a phone patch. So I could talk, and then the guy in Los Angeles would phone patch me, and I could talk to the folks.
Ah.
So we got a citation from the Korean government. Don't do that. You're interfering with our telephone tolls.
Yeah.
So Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, a few holidays, they said you could do the third-party traffic, but they didn't want us to do it.
Wow. That's a smart, huh?
So I said, okay, no phone patches. Told my parents where to go to an amateur radio near where we lived, and so I just talked directly to them.
Really?
You
How
didn't have-
often?
Once or twice a month.
Wow. What did you talk?
Well, just regular stuff. How's this going along? How do you feel? What's going on? My father had suffered a heart attack. My mother had cancer. I put in for a hardship discharge, and they said, no, you get to stay.
20th century analog internet, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah?
But the amateur radio operators, we had a whole
Yeah.
setup in at Kimpo, and it was really a lot of fun. And so to this day, I'm still an amateur radio operator. I have a rig in the car. I talk to people all over the world.
Good.
And it was a great thing to keep your mind off of what was happening there.
Very nice.
And we had vivid stories because things were happening all the time there.
Wow.
You see the ambulances moving, the people that were being hurt.
When you returned from Korea, what did people say to you? Did they recognize that you were Korean War veteran, or what happened?
Let me segue ahead. It's a lot easier to give that example. I got discharged in 1957.
Yeah.
I got out, I was at March Air Force Base, Riverside, California.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been going back and forth home because it's an hour and a half away, and folks lived in Hollywood. And I was all set up to continue college. I got out of the service on a Friday and went to college on Monday.
Hmm.
There's no dinner, there's no hello, there's no relatives come over. Nothing. 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm on campus, like nothing happened and nothing's going on anywhere. We had a crisis in the Suez Canal. We had all kinds of stuff go on. I had civilian clothes. I didn't even have to wear half military clothes.
You got the GI Bill?
Nobody talked about nothing.
Did you get the GI Bill?
Yes, I did. I have Cold War and Hot War, both. And I went to school for bachelor's degree. I went to graduate school and went on to law school. 11 years of college, 9 years with Uncle Sam.
Mm-hmm.
No one ever said anything about the Korean War, ever. 7 years ago, I came here. My office is in Koreatown, and a friend of mine asked me to come and says he had room in the office here, and my staff would come here. And I sat down and we're talking with people, and the general manager of the office said, I have somebody I'd like you to talk to, and sat down, and she introduced me in Korean. The person didn't speak English. And Savina said to the person, you know, he was in the Korean War. And the lady looked at me and said, thank you. That's
Why
it.
you didn't talk about the war that you participated?
People were not interested in listening.
Why is that? I want to know. I know, but I want to know, and I want to hear from you.
I think they just want to put it out of their mind. The thousands that were killed, the loss that occurred, you know, it just wasn't something they wanted to talk about. And so I didn't bring it up either. Anybody ever asked me, we would talk about it, but it was very rare, very, very rare. Even some of my very, very best friends that knew I had gone, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. You know, thank God you're here, and let's continue. So it wasn't until I came here to Koreatown where people would comment and say, oh my God, you were there before I was born, you know, things like that. And thank you for saving our country. That's when it happened.
Many of the interviews that I had, they were asked, where have you been when they returned from Korea? The neighbors.
Yeah.
Where have you been for 2 years? That's the question that they got. So that's...
They didn't even know.
What do you think? You have have you been back to Korea?
No.
No?
No.
You're living in a Korean town in LA, never been back to Korea.
That's correct.
But you know what happened to South Korea after you left, and after you, the US soldiers, protected us from the communist attack. Do you know what happened to South Korean economy and democracy, right?
Those are the two words. That's it. They became a democracy, the economy is spectacular, and the great people were given an opportunity to be even better.
So what do you think about? You saw some of the pictures, right?
Yes.
So you have a very clear picture of before and after the Korean War about Korea. What do you think about that?
I think it's probably as good a commentary as we did in Japan, and we did well in Japan also, and Korea is just a super emblem of some of the good that we do and some of the help that we do in the world. As we look at things going on at the present time, it's difficult to understand why people are so upset that they would want to kill us. And I don't believe we've done anything wrong, and we shouldn't be thinking that way. I think, on the other hand, my opinion is they're just jealous, which is really too bad. But, you know, we've just had a disaster occur, and there's just no explaining it other than stupidity. But I go back and think about, you know, things happen, and all through the schooling, every once in a while something would come up, I remember in graduate school, I had a class in graduate school, and the professor asked, how many people have been in the service? And a few of us raised a hand, and where were you, where were you, where were you? And I said, Korea. And he said, what do you think now? I said, it's fantastic. And now we've had the Olympics in Korea and all sorts of things, good things. Part of our way of life is with Korea now, because we have products from Korea that are just part of our life, and people don't even recognize that Samsung and LG and some of the other products, they just take it for granted. And that's the American way.
The Korea now transformed from one of the poorest country, completely devastated out of the Korean War, into 8 offering OECD member, 11th largest economy in the world, with the size a little bit bigger than the state of Indiana, without any drop of oil, 11th largest economy, and most substantive democracy in East Asia. Even I don't see Japanese version of democracy as a real substantive. It's a very rigorous, institutionalized, procedural, but
Rigid. Yeah. I'll tell you that one of the best economic ones that I saw, your interesting concepts, is kimchi. Kimchi in Korea. I was there, and one of my men, one of the Korean men that worked for me, we went down, we were at the Han River, and he says, you like kimchi? I said, no. And he said, well, I want to show you kimchi. I said, fine. So we went, and at the riverbank of the Han River, on the opposite side from Seoul, and there's a whole business. The guy had dug holes, they put pottery in the sand below, and to keep it at a constant temperature, and he says, this is three-day-old kimchi, and this is 5-day-old kimchi, this is 30-day-old kimchi, and I said, does it get any better when it gets older? And he says, not really.
Oh.
It's only better for us. I said, I can't handle the spice. It was just way too spicy for me. And it was within the first couple months I was there, and he says, I'm bringing you here because I want you to understand something. When you finally meet a Korean girl and you think you might like to take her out or go someplace, you're going to have to eat some kimchi, because otherwise you can't stand her. And if you have kimchi and she has kimchi, it neutralizes each other and you get along. I said, I might be celibate. I couldn't handle it. So I went and I saw it. And then I also saw that's where they made the charcoal right there. So there's a whole business going on. The war's going on and the kimchi's going on.
Yep.
It was fantastic.
Yep.
They say progress, we go forward, there's hope. That's where I learned the word hope.
Looking back all those years, it's like a destiny that you were supposed to be in Europe, but it ended up being in Korea. You never really knew about it. You went through all those things. Coming back, you are practicing the law here, family law. What is the overall impact of your military service upon your life? How do you put all those experiences in Korea into a perspective? What do you see about the legacy of the Korean War and Korean War veterans? All things together, just...
My perspective is one of a philosophical approach to life. And I feel that I'm lucky to be alive. There were situations that occurred that we didn't discuss, that there were things that happened, that we came under fire, and different things happened. In the Air Force, you don't really plan for that, but it does happen. We had attacks on the base, there are all sorts of things. So what it led me to believe when I finished my service here in the United States and then got discharged, and now all these years by, it leads me to a philosophy of respect for life. And I'm pleased that I'm still alive, pleased that things are doing well, but the key thing is that I see so much disrespect for life. And here we are, just a couple of days from a catastrophe that occurred where total disrespect for life is evident. And so all I can say is I preach the blessing of life and live that way. Because I'm proud that I served, and even though I didn't want to go to Korea at the time, I'm proud that I served and helped in any way that I could, in the little ways. And the best thing that happened was that orphanage, because I think I did some good.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it gives you a good feeling when at least you can say, when all's said and done, I spent almost a year there, we had the orphanage, and that makes up for a lot of stupid stuff that's done. So there are a lot of people my age and a little bit younger that are orphans in Korea. I couldn't even give you one name. That's to my embarrassment that I didn't take any names. But I didn't take any names because I was done with Korea at the time. I fulfilled my obligation, and I wasn't interested in being reminded about what happened.
Yep.
So that ends that concept, but it just tells me that there is hope, and never give up. There is hope.
What is the legacy of the Korean War and Korean War veteran?
I just don't think that the people in the United States recognize the effort that a person does in the service. It was very obvious during the Vietnam period, and now we have 10 years of veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and people could care less.
Yeah.
And so we have the Veterans Administration. It's very obvious that it doesn't have much special effect, has a big budget, and they don't do anything. And when I hear that guys are trying to get in and get help, medical help, and they have to wait 20, 30, 40 days for an appointment, shame on us.
What happened in Arizona? Right. Any other message or story you want to share with me?
Nope, that's it. Thank you very much.